Okay, let's start getting some of this Persona madness out of the way. We're going to start with Yukiko because in the Japanese metagame, Yukiko decks were the most powerful thing to come out of Persona. Talking about Yukiko is going to be interesting because Yukiko decks were one of the first competitive decks that I followed when I got into the game of Weiss, before I even had the channel. This was mainly because in my very first playthrough of Persona 4, Yukiko's the girl that I ended up with because at the time I didn't know Naoto was going to be an option. But hey, she's still number 2. That's good, right? Anyways, before we get to the deck profile, some slight history. When the very first Persona 4 set came out, Yukiko was undeniably a very good late game powerhouse card. But because Yukiko lacked any kind of early game, we normally paired it with Chie. So for a long time, Yukiko Chie was the metagame, but it was still getting beat out by a lot of other archetypes, like Junes was the main one that was keeping this from the top spot. After some of the stats started coming out, people started experimenting with Yukiko and Protagonist. That was kind of okay too, but it still wasn't really bringing Yukiko decks out ahead of the other decks. In fact, by this point, Naoto decks were really starting to take off because of how abusive her healing power is. But Yukiko fan decks were one of the main things that benefited from the release of the Mayonaka Arena set, giving Yukiko some very, very good early game cards to help fill in the gaps until you get to her late game. The Yukiko deck now has many forms. It's either a really consistent build, a really powerful build, or a really gimmicky build. And the one I'm going to show you today is probably my favorite version of the deck because it's mainly a consistency build. When I first got the request to do Yukiko, I was like, I really don't want to do this. Junes and Crossdresser decks both got murdered, so if I look at Yukiko decks, it's probably just going to be the same thing. I'm going to have to say, here's the best that I could do with the English cards because they didn't bring over all of the core cards needed to do the proper Yukiko fan deck. But much to my surprise, this isn't the case at all. They mainly just brought over the cards needed to make the Yukiko powerhouse deck, and they cut out all of the trash cards and just kept those in Japan. One or two bad Yukiko cards did slip through the cracks, but that's not necessarily a bad thing if we have all of the cards necessary to do the proper deck. So now that we've wasted about 3 minutes, this is my version of Yukiko Beatdown. Let's get to that deck list. As always, if you're just here to net deck the deck list, and here it is, please enjoy. All I ask is that you leave me a like on the way out. Now, to get it out of the way now, this is probably one of the most boring deck lists you've ever seen because I'm mainly just running the most consistent variant version of the deck that I can think of. But if you'll bear with me, you'll see just how potent this deck can be without adding gimmicks. Level 0 is the main level that gets hit when it comes to consistency. You'll understand this a bit better when I start talking about the cards, but normally what you want to do is run a lot more Chie cards because you can do a lot of really neat stuff with Chie at level 0. This is Yukiko Amagi. This was one of the main things that really brought Yukiko decks up as a competitor for beating out Junes in the best deck to come out of Persona. Its first ability is kind of neat, but, level zeros, climax combos, they don't normally go well together. This one is really okay, because if you play its climax and you attack with it, you can pay the one stock you got from attacking to get a card out of your discard pile. The card is Yukiko and Konohana Sakaya, which we are going to be using in the deck, and there's kind of a neat little trick you can do with this and that card. When I was talking about decks normally wanting to run Chie at level 0, the reason is you normally want to get this card out in the back row and then have a Chie card, whether it be the vanilla or one of the other really good Chie level 0s, just start stepping over things. Because you can rest this and give a Chie card plus 1500 power. This was also what carried us at level 1, but we're not doing that anymore. The one Chie we will be running is this one, and the reason it gets a pass is because it's Chie and Yukata, and the Yukata cards go really well with the Amagi cards because all of the bonuses that fan characters get, Yukata characters also get, so you can use these in place of Yukiko cards pretty much. And this Chi is actually really good. When it front attacks or is front attacked, you can put the top card of your deck into the waiting room, and if it's a level 0 card, this gets plus 1000 power and plus 1 level. That's only semi-decent at level 0, but at the other levels it's also still really useful. Like when you're level 3 and you're just swinging with those level 0s to try to get as much soul damage off as possible, you can thin out your deck and make it easier to climax cancel. Also, the plus 1 level takes effect before suiciders take place, so if a suicider runs into you, guess what? You're not dead. Okay, I kind of lied. There's one gimmick we're going to be running, but we can only run this gimmick because we're running the consistency build. Teddy Yukata has the same thing as Chie, where it's a Yukata character, so it gets all of the fan bonuses as well. This is the main thing you're going to be wanting to have in your back row, because during your opponent's turn, all of your characters get plus 500 power, which we've already talked about how that's not that good at level 0, but it is kind of good at level 1. If you can get 2 of these in the back row, then during your opponent's turn, all of your characters get plus 1000 power, and your opponent's not going to want to be side attacking anymore, so it does kind of help your survivability. But the reason that we say it's kind of a gimmicky card is because we are going to be running an event, so your second ability is going to take place. Since we're running 4 copies of the event, you can guarantee that you're going to be able to get this off at least once or twice a game. Oh, one important thing I need to throw out. When you're using an event, the event targets a character, and this can target a completely different character, and you always want to do that. You never want to use Inedible Curry on one of your characters and then give that same power the 1000 bonus. You will totally understand that when I get to talking about the event. Just for now, keep in the back of your mind, always use the event on one character, give the bonus to a different character. Always. Yukiko Promise is the brainstorm of the deck. I'm not normally an advocator of running 3 of the brainstorm, but there's really nothing else that we could take one of these out for and put in that would really be useful to us. Plus, the red brainstorms are always really good because they get cards out of your waiting room. One of the main problems with having this many brainstorm in a deck like this is we've already got 2 cards that are going to be vying for our back row spots. We're going to have Teddy and Yukata as our regular, basic, just plus 500 power to all characters, and we're going to have Yukiko Amagi, who you're going to want to keep alive until level 2. This is kind of nice, like you could probably get away with like having one of these in the back row if you have one of the other characters in your hand, and then just go the one turn without having that effect, and you could brainstorm maybe a couple of times and then move this to the front row and put something else in the back, but still kind of meh to have this much brainstorm in a deck with so much back row. We're really only running 2 cards at level 1, because really only 2 cards matter at level 1 when you're a Yukiko player. The Unconquerable Snow Black is a monster, and it's one of the best cards to have come out of the Mayonaka Arena set. And this is the first time when the Yukata characters really come in. If you have 3 or more other characters with Fan or Yukata, this card gets plus 500 and Super Encore. So as long as you have your back row full and at least one other attacking character, this card is a 7000 with Super Encore for 1 stock. If anyone's seen the success of Caged Bird Asuna, then you know that this is a really good effect. The one sort of drawback is this deck does not have the Kirito support that Asuna does, but still, that's a really good effect. If you get 2 of these in the front row, then they'll always have their effect, because as long as they're both in play, even if they're reversed, they still count as being in play, and you can Super Encore both of them back. We asked for a decent level 1 beater to carry us to level 2, and by golly, we got it. Okay, so we're getting kind of towards the gimmicky side of the Yukiko deck. First of all, when this card goes onto the stage from the hand, then you can rest one of your opponent's characters. This goes into the main Yukiko mechanic. You see, Yukiko has a mechanic outside of pretty much every other card in the Persona universe. Resting your opponent's characters gives Yukiko cards some kind of bonus. I've never liked this mechanic because it's just so finicky. Like, they gave us some cards to help it go a little bit smoother, but I just don't like it. It's just not that good of a mechanic to have. But you will see that this effect does come in handy at level 2. The reason we're actually running the card, though, is because it has its second effect. If you pay 1 when this card comes into play, you can choose an Inedible Curry in your discard pile and put it in your hands. First of all, thinning the waiting room is good. Second of all, that is a really good event to have, and you'll understand when we take a look at it. Also, on a side note, the other level 1 beater that we have is trash. I don't care if you disagree with me. You're wrong. I don't want to drag this out too far, but the other thing I want to throw out there is what you normally do when you're not running a consistency build is you take out this card and the event card, and you put a bunch of really good Chie cards here so they can benefit from Yukiko Amagi. And that's about all I have. Oh boy, level 2 is where the magic happens. Yukiko and Konohana is one of the first cards I want to look at because it's one of the cards that kind of ties the deck together as a whole. First of all, when you put it into play, if you have the Yukiko Amagi I was talking about before, the one that powers up Chie cards, then you can get rid of that instead of paying the 2 cost. This effect is huge, especially since this is a 2-soul attacker. So if you manage to keep 1 or 2 of your Yukiko Amagis alive in the back row, then you are about to be rewarded. Also keep in mind that you can play the Yukiko Amagi from your hand at level 2, and then put this right on top of it. This card is also another example of how powered up you can get if you start resting some characters. When it comes into play, you can rest one of your opponent's standing characters, normally one's in the back row if your opponent is attacking with everybody. And this card always has plus 500 power for each rested character your opponent has. This card can get rather decent. One of the back row characters we're going to be looking at here is one that gives all of your fan and Yukata characters plus 1000 power. So if you have 2 of those in play, then this is a natural 9000, and whenever your opponent attacks with a character, it goes up by 500 power. So overall, it's not bad. One of the things I also want to talk about is keep in mind if your opponent is attacking this character, whether it be front attack or side attack, though I guess just maybe front attack because side attack wouldn't matter as much. If your opponent attacks this card, then they are rested, and this gets the bonus right then and there before your opponent has even flipped for soul damage. So hypothetically, not saying this will ever happen, but if this and the card it's fighting are tied, and your opponent attacks, then you go up by 500 power and you step over their character. Just something I want you to remember. If you can consistently keep your opponent's back row rested, then this has the potential to be 11,500, which is okay, I guess, but my main problem with it is it can't be that powerful on your opponent's turn, which is when we'd really want it to be that powerful. Yukiko and Amaterasu is the other one. This is also a 2-soul attacker, which is really good, and if your opponent has no standing characters, it gains 2,000 power, which is almost never going to happen. I don't understand. Like, you can totally make that happen during your turn, but when your opponent attacks, unless they're doing something really cheesy with their back row that lets them rest their back row characters for some kind of effect, it's never going to come into play during your opponent's turn, and these cards don't have Super Encore. But anyways, enough belly aching. They gave us some really good cards here. If your opponent has no standing characters, it gets plus 2,000 power, which you can do during your turn to make this a 10,000 naturally and a 12,000 with the bonuses. If you attack while its climax is in play, then you can get 1 character from your waiting room into your hand. Thinning out your waiting room is good. Getting cards for Super Encore is good. Overall, this card is really good. Yukiko in Redundancy is probably a card that I should have bumped up to 4, but I didn't, so deal with it. I mainly wanted to focus on the beaters because this is such a destructive deck, but hypothetically you could bump this up to 4 and it would be whatever, but I didn't because I don't normally bump up back row characters to 4 when it's at a different level. But anyways, onto the card. All of your other fan and Yukata characters gain plus 1000 power, which, as you can imagine, is good, especially because it happens during both turns. It also changes into our level 3, and our level 3 is totally bangin', like in every sense of the word. And finally, you can rest this to rest one of your opponent's standing characters. This is the main way we're actually going to be using our level 2 beaters to their fullest. We're going to use this to rest our opponent's back row characters, and if they attacked with all of their front row characters, then you're going to be getting all of your bonuses all of the time. Okay, enough fooling around. Let's look at our level 3. This card is really dumb. It's really the only reason that Yukiko decks even existed in the first place. When this card attacks, reveal the top card of your deck, and if it's a fan or Yukata character, deal 1 damage to your opponent. No stock, no climax, absolutely no requirements at all, just every time this card attacks, you have the chance of dealing 1 damage before your attack even goes through. This effect is so broken, I don't even know where to begin talking about it. Firstly, because this is the consistency build, all of the cards in our deck, with the exception of Climaxes and the event we're running, are going to be Yukata or fan characters. So pretty much if you reveal the top card of your deck and it's a character of any kind, you deal 1 damage to your opponent. The damage can be cancelled, but that's even better. If you cancel your opponent's attack, dealing this 1 crummy non-damage, then your attack goes through and there's way less of a chance of you actually being Climax cancelled. If you don't get Climax cancelled, that's okay because you got free damage. Hypothetically, if you have 3 of these in the front row and you're attacking with all of them, it's like getting 6 attacks off, and 3 of the attacks only deal 1 damage, which at level 3 is the best. You can win a match without a single one of your attacks going through. Do you have any idea how big that is? I hope you do. But wait, we're not done. This is also a level 3 with Super Encore. This is also red. You know what red has? A lot of cards that put cards into your hand. Do you know what you can use those cards for? Super Encore. Level 3s with Super Encore is something that just never exists, especially when they have an effect as good as this, because it having this effect and Super Encore means you could ram all 3 of your level 3s into your opponent, deal 6 attacks worth of damage, and then discard 3 cards. And then when your opponent attacks and destroys all of them, discard 3 more cards, whatever, and then do it all again. Your opponent probably loses the next time you attack with all 3 of them anyway, because if they were at level 3, and if they didn't have any damage, if they were completely void of damage at level 3, you do it the first time, you attack with all 3, if none of the attacks get through, you still deal 3 damage pretty much. And then when your opponent attacks, you encore them all. When you attack the second time, you deal 3 damage, and if one of those attacks goes through, just one of them, you win the game. If not, oh well, you end your turn, and if your opponent doesn't win, then you win next turn. It's crazy. There's also another kind of tech we can do with this that I'll look at when we look at the event, which is going to be now. This effect looks super duper wordy, but I'm going to summarize it. Every single one of your characters can potentially become a suicider. And that's it. Also, if your opponent doesn't have any standing characters when you play this, which is normally going to happen at level 2, then you can take 1 character from their waiting room and put it on top of their deck to guarantee damage. For a card with no cost, this card is ridiculous. It's especially ridiculous at level 1 because you can give it to your character with Super Encore, and then if you run it into something and that character dies, you just discard 1 card from your hand and your character comes back. Their character's gone. At level 3, you can use this with your character, and if your opponent's level 3s are way stronger than yours, then it's the same thing. You get to attack, you get the effect, and also your character comes back. It's just so good. It also doesn't hurt that you can guarantee some damage with this too if you have 2 of the Yukiko in the back row and you can rest both of your opponent's back row characters. Let's also not forget that our other level 1 can dig this out of the waiting room so that we always have 1 waiting in our hand. It's just such a great option to have, and this is also the reason I was saying that if you play this card and you have Teddy and Yukata in the back row, you don't want to be giving the power boost to the character you give this card to, because your character is going to die anyway and reverse its opponent no matter what. These are the 2 climaxes we're using, and you see that? You see those symbols on the top? That is Bushiroad being ridiculous. That's right, the Yukiko decks use 8 door triggers. Don't bother reading over their effects, it's the same thing. All of your characters get +1 power, +1 soul, which is even better. All of our level 2 beaters hit for 2 soul damage. So we don't want to be using +2 soul climaxes later in the game because we don't want to be hitting for too much damage and not guaranteeing that our damage is going to go through. We also don't need the +2000 power +1 soul cards because since we have an edible curry, we're not going to be counting on stepping over our opponent's characters most of the time anyway. Giving all of our characters +1 soul is just enough to push the game into late game. We're also justified in using both of the door triggers because they go with both of our climax combos. How cheesy can you get? Pretty cheesy. Let's talk strategy. When you're redrawing, try to make sure that Inedible Curry and your level 3 are part of the cards that you're redrawing with. Neither of the cards are important to you early game, and both of them can be achieved later on using cards in our deck. If you have at least 3 level 0s in your hand, and you also have one of your level 2 beaters, specifically Konohana, go ahead and keep the level 2 to see if you can hang on to it. At level 0, we're looking to be as aggressive as possible. It's not about getting stock per se, but we do want our opponent to be at least one level higher than us pretty much at all times because we're capable of it. While we do have decent early game now, pushing the game into late game is really where our deck is going to shine. Chie and Yukata is the best 0 that you could possibly have in the front row, so try to get those in the front row as quickly as possible if you happen to have them. Teddy and Yukata is probably the main card you want to be keeping in your back row, but you could also put Yukiko Omagi or Promises with Friends in your back row. The way you decide is this. Teddy and Yukata takes regular priority. If you are using at least one Chie in your front row, then Yukiko takes priority and push one of your Teddys out so that you can power up that Chie to step over whatever your opponent has. If you have at least 3 stock and your opponent has at least 3 or more damage than you do, then go ahead and try to use some Promises with Friends in the back row because you've already got a pretty good lead already. Never use more than one Yukiko Promises with Friends in the back row at once. If you have 2 of them in your hand, use one of them as a beater and the other one in the back row as a regular brainstorm. Our level 1 strategy is not that complicated. Use Unconquerable Snow Black to be your main beater and keep whatever 0 assists you had in the back row in the back row. The brainstorming Promises with Friends is now a lot less important, so if you still have that in the back row and you draw into one of your other back row characters, push that out, put the new one in, and just use it as a beater. Finish with a single blow Yukiko, and Inedible Curry is our backup strategy. Use this if your opponent is not relying on something like Super Encore and you're just not strong enough to take him out anyway. If your opponent's running just something really monstrous, then you can run Unconquerable Black into a character with the Inedible Curry and then just discard a character to bring it back. And that is a really good strategy. Normally what you'll be doing though is using Inedible Curry after you get it back from the waiting room with Finish with a single blow, and then you'll be using it on single blow, and if you have any Teddy and Yukatas in the back row, then you can give the 1000 boost to your Unconquerable Snow Black. Keep in mind if your opponent is running something that really heavily relies on Super Encore, then this strategy is not going to work very well. If that's the case, then just attack and hope for the best. Your deck has a lot of cards that get stuff back from the waiting room, so you might be able to win a battle of attrition. You really just want the game to go to level 2 as quickly as possible. At level 2, your deck has the potential to finish the game. When you hit level 2, look at your hand and figure out what your beater options are. Obviously, just go whichever one you happen to have because they're both decently good. If you have to choose between playing one of them, then first look at your board and see if you have any Yukiko Omagi still in play, or if you have one in your hand that you can just play right now. Always go for Konohana if you have a Yukiko Omagi in play, because the fact that it's free makes it good. If you don't have Yukiko Omagi in play and you have to choose between 2 of them, then always go with Amaterasu because it has a higher base power. For your back row, it doesn't matter what you used to have, your level 2 Yukiko and Yukata always takes priority. So as soon as you get some Yukiko and Yukatas in your hand, start moving your back row out and replacing it with Yukiko and Yukata. Also, don't forget to set up Yukiko and Yukata's change as quickly as possible because having those level 3s at level 2 is going to give us a ridiculous advantage. Especially because level 2 is the only level where we don't have a beater that has Super Encore. So if we get the level 3 out of level 2, we kind of do have a beater with Super Encore at level 2. From here, it's not very complicated. See if you can set up your Yukiko's whole for every one of your opponent's rested characters' effects. If you can get some Yukiko and Yukatas in the back row, just rest the rest of your opponent's characters and get your effects and step over whatever your opponent has. This is pretty much a game of who can outlast who. If you keep stepping over your opponent's characters, they have to answer with even stronger characters, and if they can't, then they lose the game. That's just all. At level 3, our entire gameplay is pretty much just getting out our level 3 Yukiko, so do that by whatever means necessary. If you still have to use change, then go ahead and do it, I guess, but it's best at this level if you can just play him straight from your hand. With all of this level 3 Yukiko madness, we shouldn't actually need to start attacking with a bunch of level 0s to see if we can get damage to stick. It's always better to keep a full field of Yukiko level 3s. And if they happen to get reversed, then oh well, you can just discard all those level 0s that you would have had to have played if you were playing a different deck. Don't forget about an edible curry. If your opponent happens to be running something really ridiculously, stupidly strong at level 3, then go ahead and play your inedible curries. You have the rare advantage of your level 3 having super encore, which is something that a lot of decks don't have. Every time you reverse a character with your level 3, if it is totally using an edible curry, then your opponent has to keep up with discarding 3 stock, while you only have to discard 1 card from your hand. Keeping up with this kind of strategy is nearly impossible. Oh, we almost hit a half an hour again. I've really got to learn to stop being long-winded. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Leave your thoughts on the deck or any requests for future content in the comments section below. And finally, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudou news. Unless something super crazy comes out between now and Anime Expo, this is most likely the deck that I'm going to try to build for Anime Expo. So if you happen to go to any conventions and you see somebody using this deck and they have my big goofy face, then come say hello. Until next time, Weiss fans, I'll catch you later.